Hi, I'm Maelin. And on Christmas morning, my own brother kicked me out of the house, right after brunch. They said I was making things tense, that I needed boundaries. But no one mentioned the trust fund I built being stolen, or my name being wiped from the will. What's worse than being betrayed by your family? It's realizing the betrayal was never sudden. It was slow, deliberate. They erased me in silence, one photo, one check, one holiday at a time. And I still ask myself, how do you fight back when the people you love have been planning your exile for years and smiling through it the whole time? I hadn't been back in the house since last winter, and even then, it was a short visit. A 2-hour dinner filled with too many long silences and awkward eye contact. When Maelin called last week asking if I'd swing by early December just to check in before things got busy, I felt the weight of something unspoken in her voice. I couldn't explain it, but something wasn't right. The drive up to the Voss house hadn't changed much. Snow still lined the edges of the winding driveway. The porch light flickered like it always did, a bulb they never replaced. I parked, sat for a moment with the engine running, then shut it off and stepped out. My breath puffed into the cold air as I walked up to the door, a bottle of wine in one hand and a box of Marlene's favorite maple cookies in the other. She opened the door before I could knock. "You're early," she said, smiling, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Just wanted to beat the snow," I answered. She hugged me with one arm, then turned quickly toward the kitchen. "Come in, get warm." I dropped my coat on the banister by habit, then paused. "Hey, can I put my bag in my old room?" I asked. Maelin didn't look up from arranging cheese slices. "Actually, it's locked right now. Storage stuff, holiday decorations, you know how it gets." I nodded slowly, something tightening in my chest. "Right, sure." Dinner wasn't for another hour. I lingered around the edges of conversation, sipping tea and trying not to stare at the locked door at the end of the hallway. Later, while Maelin and Alaric were in the kitchen, I walked back down that hallway. I twisted the knob, still locked, but I knew where the spare key was. Same place it had always been, taped behind the hallway painting of Lake Crescent. I unlocked the door. The room smelled of mothballs and cardboard. My old bed was gone, replaced by a stack of boxes labeled "Misc Junk, Do Not Open." My childhood baseball bat lay crookedly across a plastic bin. Trophies and yearbooks were shoved into corners. The photo of me and Dad fishing. Gone. There was no trace of me left in that room, not one piece of the life I'd built under this roof. I backed out quietly and relocked the door. Dinner that night was a celebration of Alaric's recent donation to the school district. Iris beamed as she passed around printed flyers for the event next week. In bold print, the Voss Education Fund. "That's impressive," I said, keeping my voice level. "Didn't realize you were funding that." Alaric glanced at me, sipped his wine. "It just came together recently." I remembered pitching that exact initiative to the district board 6 months ago, using my own savings to start the application process. But no mention of me. Nothing. I waited until Iris was clearing plates. In the hallway, I caught Alaric by the arm. "That fund, that was my idea, Alaric." He raised an eyebrow, not bothering to deny it. "We're family, Maelin. It's all shared legacy anyway." I opened my mouth, then closed it as Maelin stepped into the hallway. "Is there a problem?" she asked, drying her hands with a towel. I shook my head. "Nope, just chatting." She smiled thinly. "Good. No need to keep score over family efforts." Back at my place that night, I poured myself a glass of water and sat in silence. My phone buzzed, a message from a former colleague congratulating Alaric on the fund. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop and started a document. Instances of credit reassignment, Voss House. I began to type. Donation fund. Alaric takes credit. Community event logistics. Iris rebranded without my name. Scholarship design. Alaric attributed as founder. 3 entries in before I even had to think hard. If they could lock me out of a room I grew up in, if they could plaster Alaric's name on something I created, what else had they boxed away? The next time I set foot in the house, it was just for a practical reason. Maelin had asked me to stop by and pick up a box of old insurance documents she said she couldn't find space for anymore. Said they were in the front hall, already labeled with my name. When I arrived, the air inside the house felt different. Not colder, exactly, just thinner. Lighter, but not in a good way. The way a room feels when it's been emptied out of something important. I stepped in, wiped the snow from my boots, and paused out of habit to glance at the wall of framed photos lining the hallway. Family traditions. Birthdays, vacations, Thanksgiving spreads. I'd grown up watching that gallery grow. But now something looked off. The centerpiece photo, the one from last Thanksgiving, had been reframed. Same frame, same background, but fewer people. I leaned in. Everyone else was there. Maelin in her red sweater, Alaric at the head of the table, Iris holding her wine glass just so. But where I used to be, standing between the fireplace and the kitchen doorway, was now a neatly hung holiday wreath. Decorative, harmless, completely hollow. It hit me harder than it should have. They hadn't replaced me with another person, just a circle of pine and ribbon. A placeholder that said, "We needed symmetry, but not you." I took a picture of the photo with my phone. No one saw me. Maelin called out from the kitchen that the box was near the coat closet. I didn't respond. The following Saturday, I attended a community fundraiser at the church, where our family had held every Easter brunch since I was a kid. It was honoring donors to a new education grant program. Alaric was on stage, shaking hands, accepting a certificate. The program listed him as the founder of the A. Voss Education Impact Fund. I sat in the second row, quiet. The wording of the initiative matched, word for word, the proposal I'd written 6 months ago. I remembered formatting that exact bullet list at 1 a.m. with an open Word doc and a thermos of stale coffee. And now here it was, recited back like scripture, with my name nowhere in sight. The room clapped politely. I didn't. Then Iris took the mic. Her voice floated above the crowd. None of this would have happened without Alaric's vision. He is, and always has been, the backbone of this family's legacy. Maelin clapped the loudest. She turned to me in the audience and offered a small, practiced smile. Not warmth, not pride, just confirmation. You were never the backbone. I almost stood up. Almost. Instead, I sat back and stared at the program in my hands. That was my grant structure. That was my name. I left before the closing remarks, didn't say goodbye. Just walked out into the wind and let the chill bite into me until my fingers stung, and I could feel something other than being forgotten. At home that evening, I didn't turn on the lights. I pulled up the photo of the family wall on my phone, zoomed in to where the wreath hung, and whispered aloud, "If erasing me from a photo is that easy, what else have they erased?" Back at my apartment, the box I'd been meaning to unpack since September still sat unopened in the corner near the heater. The cardboard edges had softened, slouched inward with time. I didn't know why I suddenly felt pulled toward it, only that after the fundraiser and the cropped photo, it no longer felt like just a pile of junk. I cleared space on the table and tugged the box closer. Inside were random things: a screwdriver, some rusted bolts, a half-spent measuring tape. Then, near the bottom, I found a manila envelope with handwriting I hadn't seen in nearly a decade. Dad's. "Tools," it said, printed in all caps, Not my stuff or Maelin's, just tools, practical, quiet. Like him. The flap opened easily, paper yellowed at the corners. Inside, a letter folded once. No date. Just the name Maelin at the top, written in a steadier hand than I remembered him having during those last few months. I set it aside, unable to open it right away. Instead, I sat there with my fingers resting on the envelope and let myself fall backward in time. One memory rose up, clear and uninvited. Christmas, 1999. I was 10, the house was packed. Alaric had friends over, there were cousins on the couch, and Iris was still new, still polite. Plates were handed out quickly. Kids grabbed seats first, adults filled in around them. By the time I came back from washing my hands, every chair was taken. "Where should I sit?" I'd asked. Maelin, half laughing, waved a hand without looking. "He doesn't mind. He's easy." Someone, maybe Iris, maybe a cousin, pulled a folding tray table into the hallway. I was handed a paper plate, still warm from the rolls. No napkin, no fork. I remember balancing it on my lap, hearing them laugh in the dining room, the clinking of cutlery echoing off walls lined with photos I'd one day be erased from. Back in the present, I blinked and opened the letter. It wasn't sentimental. My dad never was. But it was his voice, steady and clear. "Son, if this ends up in your hands, something's gone sideways." I exhaled. "You've always been the quiet one, observant, too generous for your own good. That's not weakness, but it'll get you swallowed alive in this family if you're not careful." I read the next part twice. "Trust your instincts. Keep your paperwork. People rewrite history when the ink's still wet." There were notes in the margins, reminders about property deeds, the trust he set up, and a bullet point that simply said, "Power changes people, especially those who never earned it." The last line was underlined. "You don't owe them your silence." I sat there for a while, not angry, not crying, just full. Full of a kind of ache that made my shoulders feel heavier and lighter all at once. The sound of wind brushed against the window. Outside, someone scraped ice from a windshield. I reached for my laptop. I opened a blank spreadsheet and titled it, "Red Folder, Voss House Discrepancies." Entry 1, Cropped Photo, Thanksgiving 2022. Entry 2, Education Grant credited to Alaric entry. Removed from family login on shared investment account. I paused. Then I pulled open the drawer near the bottom of the bookshelf, the one I hadn't touched since the move. There, buried under tax folders and utility receipts, was a box labeled Joint Accounts, Alaric Voss. I didn't open it. Not yet. I sat back in the chair, Dad's letter still in my lap, and whispered to the room, I wasn't just erased. I was groomed to disappear. The voicemail came just after 7 a.m. Iris, chirpy as ever, spoke like we were planning a brunch instead of another maneuver. "Hey, Maelin, Alaric and I were hoping we could sit down this week. Go over a few things about the scholarship fund paperwork. Just tightening things up for the media push." I stared at my phone, letting her words hang in the air while the coffee machine hummed in the background. A week ago, I would have assumed good intentions. Now? Every word felt like a preamble to a cut. I told her I was free that afternoon. We met at Dovetail Cafe, neutral territory. Alaric wore a blazer over a turtleneck, effortlessly put together. Iris had on a camel coat and sunglasses despite the overcast sky. I walked in with a black folder. Not the red one. Not yet. They'd already ordered. Alaric slid a printout across the table. "Here's the press kit," he said. "The launch event's locked in for next Friday. We've confirmed names and logos, just wanted your eyes on it before we send it out." I scanned the document. The A. Voss Education Fund. Paragraph after paragraph about his commitment, his vision, his generosity. My name? Nowhere. I looked up. You're listing contributors here. You realize I funded this, right? Alaric nodded slowly. Of course, but it's about branding cohesion, simplicity. One face. It reads cleaner. That's not cohesion. That's erasure. He leaned back in his seat, sipping his espresso like he was being patient with a child. You were the spark, Maelin. I built the fire. You know how this works. Iris chimed in. We thought you'd be proud. It's still your work, in spirit. In spirit, I repeated. Right. The rest of the meeting was nothing but noise. They discussed speaking orders, invitation lists, photo backdrops. I said little, took my copy of the press packet and walked out just after they ordered pastries. That night, I emailed Maelin. Hi, Mom. Quick question. Do you remember the seed money I sent for the scholarship pilot? Could you confirm it came from me? She replied the next morning. No greeting, no explanation. Just a padded envelope with a stack of receipts, each one printed in black and white. No highlights, no circles, no signature. Taped to the top was a yellow sticky note. Stop keeping score. We don't do debt in families. I stared at the note like it had teeth. Mortgage assistance, tuition transfers, home repair loans. All there, all carefully organized, yet treated like irrelevant footnotes. I sifted through them silently, each sheet a reminder that I was allowed to give, but never to be remembered for it. I took a blank folder from the drawer and labeled it in ink. Dismissals. The next day, I found myself walking downtown, no real destination in mind. My steps took me past the community center where the plaque for the scholarship fund had already been mounted. It shimmered in gold letters, proud and permanent. A Voss Education Impact Fund, in honor of the Voss legacy. My legacy, written over. My hand, scrubbed clean. I stood there, hands in pockets, wind tugging at my coat. You didn't build the fire, I said under my breath. You stole the matches. I woke up before my alarm, heart already pounding like it knew something I didn't. I tried logging into the trust's investment portal just to check a number that had been stuck in my head. But instead of the usual dashboard, I got a flashing red message. Access denied. I refreshed the page, logged out, logged back in. Same message. By mid-morning, I was pacing outside the financial advisor's office downtown. Kelly, the assistant, gave me a polite smile and brought me back to the conference room where I'd once signed documents with my father. The same walls, same mahogany table. Except now I wasn't being offered coffee. It's been updated, she said, tapping her tablet. Your access was revoked by joint instruction. Maelin and Alaric. There's a notation, citing mental health concern. She said it softly, as if trying not to hurt me more than the words already did. I didn't argue. I just stood, thanked her, and left. I drove aimlessly for a while after that. Every turn seemed to take me farther away from the parts of town that felt like mine. At a red light, my phone buzzed. A message from Brian, someone I hadn't seen since grad school. Hey man, why aren't you at the Voss Winter Gala? Place is packed. Alaric's killing it on stage. I blinked at the screen. The Voss Winter Gala. The same event I had put the deposit down for, when the family said they needed a venue but were a little short. Back when Alaric told me I wouldn't be expected to attend, that it's more of a networking thing. My jaw clenched so tight I could feel the pressure in my temples. I pulled over, opened social media, and searched the event. Pictures were already rolling in, Alaric on stage, holding a mic, Iris beside him with her camera-ready smile. Maelin at a back table, surrounded by familiar faces. My name wasn't in the captions. It wasn't on the program. It wasn't even whispered. I wasn't just uninvited. I'd been scrubbed, That evening I got dressed anyway. Not for the party, but to visit my father's grave like I'd planned. I put on the suit he'd given me for my first job interview. A bit tight now, but it still carried the shape of his approval. As I drove through the dark streets, the anger inside me cooled. Not into peace, but into something sharper. Focused. This wasn't about oversight. It wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a strategy, a careful, methodical phasing out. Erase the history. Rebrand the legacy. I parked near the cemetery but didn't get out. Instead, I opened the glove box, found the small box of his cufflinks, and held them in my hand. They had weight. Real weight, not symbolic. "They can lock me out of the house," I said aloud, voice steady. But they forgot. I kept the blueprints. The flash drive had been in the back of my desk drawer for years, tucked behind a stack of old contracts and a broken leather watch band. I found it while digging for a printer cable, one of those minor frustrations that sends you deeper into forgotten spaces. It was labeled in my father's handwriting. That was what stopped me. I sat down, plugged it into my laptop, and waited. The folder opened quickly. Just one file. Redline Voss Patio.wav. The metadata said it had been saved at 8:03 p.m., September 12th, the week after Labor Day, the night I missed dinner because of a client call that ran long. I clicked play. The audio crackled at first, picking up the clink of ice in glasses, footsteps on the stone patio, and laughter. My mother's, then Iris, then Alaric. "Honestly," Maelin said, between sips of something, "he's too soft to fight back." I froze. Alaric's voice followed. "That's why it works. He's useful, until he isn't." They kept talking. About money, about the fund, about how I'd make a fuss if I realized how much of the paperwork I'd never actually seen. Then came Iris, cool as ever. "If he starts pushing, we just play the concern card. Mental health, emotional strain. People love that angle." My stomach twisted. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't miscommunication. It was planned. I sat still as the audio ended, staring at the progress bar. Then I played it again. And again. After the fourth time, I copied the file 3 times, one to a cloud drive, one to a second USB I tucked into the fireproof box with my father's cufflinks, and one to an encrypted folder I labeled simply Red Folder. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I made tea. I opened the window. I made a list. Then I picked up my phone and called Ronan. He answered on the second ring. "Maelin, I need to ask you something," I said. "Did my dad ever talk to you about a second will?" There was a pause. I heard him exhale. "Not over the phone. Can you meet tomorrow morning?" "Same diner?" "Same booth." The next day, just after 9, I met him at Hazel's diner. Quiet enough for hard conversations, noisy enough for privacy. Ronan wore his usual tan coat and a face that looked older than when I saw him last. He handed me an envelope. Sealed. Dated 3 days before my father's stroke. "Victor gave this to me," he said. "Said if anything happened, if there were questions, I'd know when to hand it over." Inside was the original will, and there it was. In ink. My name. Sole executor. Primary heir. No mention of Alaric. I closed the document and slid it back into the envelope. Ronan was watching me carefully. "You okay?" "I don't know yet," I said. "But I'm awake now." Back home, I laid the will beside my laptop. Then I added the audio file transcript to the folder. I looked at both, the paper, the digital truth, and whispered, "They took me out of the story." But they didn't know I had the original script. The message came through while I was pouring myself a drink. No name, just a screenshot from a number I didn't recognize. "Thought you'd want to see this. Making the rounds." The screenshot showed a group chat, me supposedly trashing the family. "They're vultures," one message read. "I'm going to bury them in court. I've got enough dirt to ruin every last one." I stared at it for a moment. Not because I thought it was real, but because it was so close to something I might have actually said in private. Only I didn't. I knew I didn't. Then came the second message. Same sender. A new screenshot, different timestamp. This one had me telling someone to, "Just wait, they won't see it coming." It ended with a smirking emoji. I took a breath, saved both images, opened my laptop, ran metadata on the screenshots. They'd been captured on a Samsung Galaxy. The original file names linked back to a burner number, one I'd seen once before in an old email exchange forwarded through Iris's work domain. She must have kept it when she left her last firm. They hadn't just painted me as dangerous. They'd weaponized my own quiet. I didn't post a denial, didn't scream on social media. That would have made me look guilty. Instead, I forwarded the screenshots to my attorney and flagged the metadata. Then I waited. That evening, just after 8, someone knocked on my door. 3 quick raps. Not a friend. I opened it to 2 uniformed officers, standing calmly like they'd been trained to downplay everything. "Maelin Voss?" the taller one asked. "Yes." "We received a call. Anonymous. Said you may be a danger to yourself or others." I didn't blink. "You got a name?" "No, sir. Just a concern. We're not here to accuse you of anything, but if you'd be willing to answer a few questions." I stepped aside. They didn't touch anything. One stood in the living room, the other at the edge of the hallway. They asked if I owned firearms. I told them no. They asked if anyone in the family had ever filed a protection order. I said no. Then I walked to my desk, pulled out the same folder that now felt heavier than it used to, and laid it on the table. Inside was the altered will, the recording from the patio, a copy of the screenshots. "This," I said quietly, "is why they called you." The younger officer read through the papers, then looked up. "This all checks out? Call the lawyer. Name's at the bottom of the transcript." They stepped out for a moment. I stood in the kitchen, sipping tea, watching the steam curl above the cup like smoke from something already burned down. When they came back, the older one nodded. "Sir, there's no need for further action. We're going to make a note of this incident, for your protection as much as theirs." I nodded. "I appreciate that." They left a card, just in case. I stood in the doorway for a while after they'd gone, listening to the silence settle back over the apartment. It hadn't been about arresting me. It was about discrediting me. I walked to the window, watched the patrol car disappear down the block, then said softly, "If they needed the cops to shut me up, they're terrified of what I'm about to say." Christmas morning arrived with frost on the windows and silence on the roads. I pulled into the Voss driveway just before 8, same as always, as if this were any other year. But the silence in my gut knew better. I carried a tin of shortbread cookies under one arm and a leather messenger bag across my chest. The bag didn't leave my side. Not today. The house was perfect. Garland wrapped the banisters, lights twinkled like they were rehearsed to do so. A candle flickered in the front window. A cinnamon scent that felt performative. Maelin answered the door, her robe pristine, smile pressed thin. "You're early." "Traffic was light," I replied. Inside, everyone was already there. Alaric standing by the fire, Iris on the couch, legs tucked neatly, mimosa in hand. No one stood up. No one said Merry Christmas. Brunch was as civil as it was flavorless. Quiche, fruit salad. I chewed slowly, listening to Alaric fill the air with a story about his newest grant partners. Maelin nodded dutifully. Iris laughed when he wanted her to. I sat at the end of the table, alone on one side, like an extra chair dragged in at the last minute. Then Alaric cleared his throat and leaned forward. "I want to say something," he began, his voice laced with mock concern. "We've had some tough conversations lately, and, well, we think it's healthier if you take some space from family events for a while." I blinked once. "We?" Maelin chimed in, dabbing her napkin, though nothing had spilled. "It's not personal, Maelin. It's about boundaries. Things have been tense." Iris said nothing, just slid her hand over Alaric's and stared at me like I'd just spilled wine on the carpet. I set down my fork, took a breath, then stood, adjusted the strap on my shoulder, and walked toward the Christmas tree. "I brought one last gift," I said evenly. "Didn't want to interrupt brunch." I knelt, placed a red folder directly beneath the lowest branch, nudging aside a wrapped package labeled, "To Iris from Alaric." The red folder stood out like a wound. "You may want to open that before the coffee gets cold," I said. No one moved. "I'm serious," I added, tone unchanging. "Inside, you'll find a few things. Financial transfers in my name, will documents dated before the stroke, a transcript of a conversation on the patio. You remember, Maelin? September 12th? Her hands trembled around her teacup. Alaric's face drained of color. Iris stood suddenly, knocking over her glass. It shattered against the hardwood, orange juice mixing with broken crystal like a warning. I waited. No one spoke. So I picked up my coat. At the door, I paused, turned back, catching each face in one slow sweep. "Merry Christmas," I said. "I thought it was time you finally opened something real." The house disappeared in my rearview mirror, but the silence inside me stayed loud. My hands shook on the wheel, not from nerves, but from restraint. I'd done what I came to do. Now it was time to finish what they'd started. I stopped at a roadside diner halfway between the estate and downtown. Ordered coffee I wouldn't drink. Sat in a booth and scrolled through my phone. The internet was already humming. Local groups, back-channel forums, even church gossip threads had vague posts. Something wild happened at the Voss house this morning. Heard Alaric turned white as snow? I didn't comment. I just watched it spread. That evening, I met Ronan and his lawyer at a small private office behind an accounting firm. Fluorescent lights buzzed above us, and a kettle hissed in the corner. The lawyer's name was Darla. Precise, quiet, unbothered. She wore a burgundy sweater and square glasses that made her look like the kind of person who didn't just remember dates. She remembered motives. She laid the papers out on the table, one by one. "These signature blocks were tampered with," she said, pointing. "Digitally, very clean, but the compression trail doesn't match authentic ink. These were forged, likely layered over scanned versions of originals." My breath caught. Alaric's name was there. So was Marlene's. The trust modifications that stripped me of authority, the ones that erased me, were counterfeit. "We also compared these with the signed version your father submitted to the county," she continued. "That version matches the original will you provided. So what they filed? Legally invalid and prosecutable." Ronan looked at me. "It's strong, Maelin. You could take this all the way." I nodded, but I wasn't ready to celebrate. Not yet. "I want to give them a chance to respond first," I said. "Officially." Darla tilted her head. "Publicly?" "Precisely." She drafted a clean notice, attaching the forensic report, the transcript from the patio recording, and a scanned copy of the original will. The email was addressed to Alaric, with Maelin copied. It was sent from a neutral domain. Subject line, Voss Legacy, Misrepresentation Inquiry. I watched her click send. By the time I left the office, the wind had picked up. I zipped my coat higher and kept walking. It was almost midnight when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number. "Maelin?" the voice asked, familiar, raspy. Yes? This is Calla, from the bookstore. I don't know if you remember. I remember. She paused. I just wanted to say, back when I was about to lose the shop, you stepped in, quietly, no credit. You didn't even let me thank you properly. I leaned against a lamppost. They're saying awful things about you, she went on. But I remember, and so do others. I didn't know what to say. They can try to erase you, she said, voice firmer now. But the people you helped remember. I held on to that. Later I drove past my father's old workshop. The door was still padlocked, rust climbing the hinges. I parked, stepped out, and walked to the threshold. The snow crunched under my boots. My breath fogged in the dark. I pulled the keys from my pocket. Not to open it, but just to feel their weight. Let them run their show. I'd rebuild my father's legacy from the ground up if I had to, and this time I'd sign every brick myself. The county recorder's office opened at 8 a.m. sharp. I was there at 7:50, sitting in my car, watching the frost fade from the glass, waiting for the line to form. But no one came. Just me, a folder thick with truth, and the kind of silence that feels like the last inhale before a storm. By 8:07, I was at the window, handing over documents that had taken years of patience and a lifetime of neglect to assemble. The clerk, a woman named June, didn't blink at the size of the file. She read quickly, pausing only to initial along the checklist stapled on top. I watched her face shift as she skimmed the forensic report. The flagged digital signatures, the timestamp discrepancies, the notarized statements. When she reached the recording transcript, she looked up once, made eye contact with me, and said nothing. Just nodded. Respectfully. By law, the documents had to be reviewed and scanned before entering the public docket. June promised it wouldn't take more than 48 hours. I thanked her. I didn't say goodbye. 42 hours later, the filing hit the public record. Someone posted it to the Bend Neighborhood Watch Facebook group within minutes. Then it hit Nextdoor. Then Reddit. By dinner, screenshots were everywhere. Highlighted paragraphs, underlined signatures, snippets of the patio conversation pasted over holiday wreath memes. One caption read, "Turns out the Voss holiday drama isn't just rich people problems." By the following morning, the fallout began. Marlene's name stopped showing up in church service bulletins. 2 of her longtime prayer circle friends blocked her on Facebook. Rumors spilled down grocery aisles, whispered behind produce bins, into the hands of baristas, who suddenly stopped smiling when she ordered. Alaric's business partner pulled out of a property deal. A local columnist questioned his ethics in a Substack post titled, "The Heir That Wasn't." Screenshots started rolling in. Texts, forum threads, emails from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Some offered apologies. Others confessed they never believed Alaric but had been too scared to speak up. Then came the unexpected. A voice memo from a high school friend I hadn't heard from since graduation. "I just wanted to say," she whispered, "it's good someone finally spoke the truth out loud. You deserved better. And I'm glad people finally see it." The next afternoon, I walked into a corner store near my apartment to grab batteries. Marlene was at the register, standing stiffly, holding a bouquet of hydrangeas like a hostage. I turned my face away, but the cashier didn't. "I just don't understand why everyone's making such a big deal," Marlene snapped. "We're a family. Families have disagreements." The cashier said nothing, just handed her the receipt and a plastic bag. I stepped into the aisle behind the bread rack. Waited. As Marlene walked by me toward the door, she didn't even flinch. But a woman I didn't know followed her with her eyes, then leaned over to me and whispered, "I thought you were the problem. I was wrong." I nodded once. That was enough. Later, I took a walk through the old neighborhood and passed by the Voss Community Library. I hadn't been there in months. On the stone wall near the entrance, a brass nameplate gleamed under winter sunlight. Founding Vision, Alaric Voss, in honor of the Voss family. I stared at it for a moment, then muttered under my breath, "Let's see how long that nameplate holds." 3 days after the filing went public, the mailman dropped a small padded envelope through the slot in my apartment door. No return address, no markings. Inside, a mini SD card, labeled in shaky handwriting I'd recognize even if the ink had faded. "V. Voss, final message. I didn't move for a long time." Then I slid the card into the slot on my laptop, clicked the file, and waited. The video flickered to life with the flat fluorescent glow of a hospital ceiling. Then his face, thinner, older, more sunken than I wanted to remember. His voice came next, soft and raspy but focused. "If this ever reaches you, it means something went wrong. And I'm sorry, Maelin. I should have said more when I had the time. I should have made things harder to rewrite." He coughed, winced, then continued. "I never told you this outright, but you were meant to carry this name. You were the one who built quietly, who never asked for applause. That's the kind of strength I trusted. That's the legacy I hoped would last. I knew your brother. Well, I knew how much he cared about how things looked. You always cared more about how they worked." He paused again. The oxygen monitor beeped softly behind him. "If you're seeing this, it's probably because I didn't do enough. That's my fault. I left holes where I should have locked doors. But I believe in you, son. I always did." The last frame froze on his face, smiling faintly, eyes tired but proud. "You were always the quiet storm, son. Always." The screen went black. I watched it again, then once more. The third time, I didn't stop the tears. Not because I was angry, but because for the first time in years, I didn't have to wonder if he saw me. If he'd ever really choken me, he had. He just hadn't lived long enough to defend it. Later that evening, I received a message from the Community Mediation Center downtown. Maelin had requested a meeting. She asked for a neutral space. I agreed, under one condition. No excuses, no rewrites, just truth. We met in a quiet room with tall windows and a circle of chairs. A facilitator sat nearby, more witness than guide. Maelin walked in with red-rimmed eyes and a scarf clutched in her hands. She'd sat across from me and didn't speak for a full minute. "I should have listened to him," she said finally. "He told me what would happen. I didn't believe, or maybe I just didn't want to. I said nothing, just listened. I let your brother spin the story. I stood by when he moved pieces that weren't his to move, and then I blamed you for noticing." Her voice broke. She didn't cry, not fully, just folded in on herself in a way that felt older than she was. "I won't ask for forgiveness. I don't expect it." "Good," I said quietly, "because I'm not there." She nodded once, looked at her hands. "I just wanted to say it out loud, somewhere neutral, somewhere honest." I exhaled. Let the silence fill the room without trying to fix it. Some truths don't repair, but they remove the poison. 5 days after Christmas, I found myself in the center of my apartment, surrounded by things that no longer felt like mine. The faded holiday card from Maelin with, "To my favorite son, don't tell Alaric," scribbled on the back. The cufflinks Alaric gave me at our father's funeral, polished but hollow, a copy of the family's '89 Christmas photo with my head barely peeking behind a plant. All these items once held meaning. Now, they were weight, reminders of stories rewritten by the hands that once claimed to love me. I packed each piece into a box, carefully, wrapped in linen, notes attached, one after the other. "Thank you for this memory. I now release it." Then I dropped a burned DVD in each box, the red folder in digital form. Documents, transcripts, signatures, audio. Truth, preserved like fossils. I wrote one letter, printed 3 copies. This is the last thing I'll ever give you. I'm keeping the only thing I ever truly owned, my dignity. The next morning I mailed the packages, one to Alaric's office, one to Marlene's house, one to Iris, via certified delivery that required her signature. I tracked them from my phone, saw them land one by one. That same afternoon, I uploaded an open letter online. No names, no accusations, just words. I once believed that if you worked hard, loved quietly, and stayed loyal, people would remember. I was wrong. Some people only remember the ones who shout the loudest. But those who mattered? They saw me. I was written out of my own life story. Not with violence, but with silence. With omitted thank yous, cropped photos, reassigned achievements. If you've ever felt like you were invisible in your own family, this is for you. You are not crazy. You are not broken. And you don't need to return to a table that's been cleared of your chair. Sometimes you don't reclaim your place at the table. You build a new table entirely. I hit publish. Logged off. I didn't read the comments. A few days later, I stepped into a modest office space in the middle of the legal district. A new plaque hung on the front wall. Voss Foundation for Ethical Legacy. The receptionist greeted me with a nod, then handed me the final piece, the dedication plaque. I walked it down the hallway and installed it myself. In memory of Victor Voss and the truth he tried to protect. The screws clicked into place, and with that, the old nameplate bearing Alaric's name, removed 2 weeks earlier, was officially gone. That evening, I sat beneath the old oak tree my father planted the summer I turned 9. The roots pushed through the dirt like they remembered. I poured myself a cup of coffee from a thermos and watched the branches shiver under the last light of December. They erased my seat at the table, I whispered, so I built a new table. This time I decide who gets a chair. They say family is where you go when the world turns cold. But what happens when it's the family that shuts the door first? This journey taught me that silence can be louder than shouting, and that dignity is a currency only you can protect. I didn't fight to be accepted back into a space that had erased me. I built something new, something rooted in truth. Because the legacy you leave isn't made of buildings or bank accounts. It's made of your choices, especially the hard ones. So, if you're watching this and you've ever felt like the invisible one, the overlooked one, the one always left out of the frame, know this. You are not alone, and you are not powerless. You get to decide what you carry forward and what you send back, unopened. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been written out of a story that was yours to begin with? What would you do if you had to build your own table? If this video moved you or reminded you of something deep, leave a comment with a 1 or tell me where you're watching from. And if it didn't hit for you, I'd love to know why. What would make it better, more honest, more human? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss what's next. Every story here has a voice. And maybe, one day, it'll be yours.